Good afternoon to you all, and welcome. My name is Barbara Muraca. I am Associate Professor of Environmental Philosophy here at University of Oregon in the Philosophy Department and Environmental Studies program. Before starting, I would like to read the Territorial Land Acknowledgement. The University of Oregon is located on Kalapuya Ilihi, the traditional indigenous homeland of the Kalapuya people. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. Today, descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon, of the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon, and continue to make important contributions in their communities at University of Oregon and across the land we now refer to as Oregon. This includes, we express our respect for all federally recognized tribal nations of Oregon. This includes the Burns-Paiute tribe, the Confederated Tribes of the Coast, Lower Umpqua-Siuslaw Indians, the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon, the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians of Oregon, the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, the Coquille Indian Tribe, the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians, and the Klamath Tribes. We also express our respect for all other displaced indigenous people who call Oregon home. On behalf of the Philosophy Colloquium series, it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome you all at the Science in Ceremony Roundtable today, an event organized in collaboration with the Snake River to Solid Sea Spirit of the Waters Totem Pole Journey. It is a gift to have the Totem Pole Journey on the University of Oregon campus this week, and it is out on the green at the EMU in this big white tent, in case you didn't know that. We are profoundly grateful to our partners and guests, the Lamination House of Tears Carvers, and the intertribal nonprofit organization, Cecilia, for making this possible. If you want to know more about the history of the Totem Pole Journey, do not miss our events tomorrow at noon in the ballroom here in the EMU, art, ceremony, and activism, and 2 events at night, tomorrow night and Saturday night at 7:30 is a gathering at the Totem Pole at the EMU Greens for ceremony, welcoming, prayers, introductions, and the screening of the Whale People Protectors of the Sea exhibit. Our thanks go also to University of Oregon partners, and in particular, the University of Oregon Student Sustainability Center, the Center for Environmental Futures, the Philosophy Department, the Environmental Studies Program, the U of O Native American Student Union, and the U of O Many Nations Longhouse. We would also like to thank all the sponsors here at University of Oregon. It's too many of them to name them, but you can see them on the slide here behind my back. So many supported us and welcome us all, and you all here. And finally, a big thank goes to our team of graduate and undergraduate student workers and all the volunteers to help out for their fantastic work. Thank you all for joining us today. Let me first of all, before we go into the actual things, introduce to you my co-facilitator, Dr. Kurt Russo. You want to stand up? No? USC. That direction, right? That's. Dr. Russo is Cecilia co-executive director, founder and former executive director of the Native American Land Conservancy, and research fellow at the California Center for Native Nations, University of California. Together, we will do our best to guide us through an unconventional conversation. And one of the speakers is on the way, got stuck in traffic, will arrive during the thing, so we'll, you know, we'll be flexible and accommodate for how things work and how the flow goes. Dr. Masha Weisinger and Sarah Loquist will also help during the phase of collecting questions from the audience. Dr. Weisinger is also the director of the Center for Environmental Futures and professor of environmental history here. And Sarah is a doctoral student here in the landscape architecture. Sorry about that. Before entering the core of the discussion, let me briefly explain how we will proceed, because there are different rounds and different series. It's a little unconventional, so I need you all to be on board with that. I will give a brief introduction of the topic and of our speakers. At the first round, every panelist will have around 12 minutes to offer their ideas in a potlatch style conversation. During this first round, you're all invited to participate in this conversation by using the cards that are on your chairs. If you don't have anything to write, raise your hand, and will someone bringing you a marker or something to write. You can write there questions, ideas, or comments as your own contribution to the potlatch of ideas that this event will embody. This during the first round. At the end of the first round, please make sure that the written cards wander to the side of the room and will be collected by Sarah, by Marsha, and can you stand up? Yeah. Sorry, I forgot your name. Ruby, sorry, and Ruby. So make sure that they can be collected on the sides of the room. During the second round, in which the panelists will have a little bit of time to comment on each other's contribution, our magical team will sort out the cards, cluster them, and make sure that many of these messages will be conveyed. We will keep all the cards, we'll take pictures of them, and we will continue the conversation. We will make them visible and publish all of the cards and all of your contribution after the event. We will then have a last round when the panelists can address all the contribution from the audience. Okay? Great. Let me now go into the actual topic of today and the discussion. The Science in Ceremony Roundtable takes at its point of departure the proposition that indigenous ceremonial knowledge in the predicates and presupposition of its protocols and practices is a science in its own right and in its own terms. Traditional ceremonial knowledge has an internal perspicuous order, criteria for truth, and standards of coherence that are rigorous, right, and appropriate, and is part of an epochal, ancient, sovereign, and inspirited world-making process. Modernist mathematized formulations of knowledge portray traditionalistic ways of knowing what is real and true as having, at best, a minimum of acceptable theory. The aim of this roundtable is not to debate this logic and this topic. Our aim in this potlatch of ideas is to bring to this conversation in a good way an exchange of ideas to help identify the questions that need to be asked to further explore this proposition from an indigenous as well as non-indigenous perspective. So we are offering you all two opening questions for the reflection and also for your contribution to the panelists and to the audience and everyone participating. The first question is, what is a question you feel needs to be asked on this subject, and why is asking it important? The second is, how can an understanding of indigenous science of ceremony provide, through radical listening, a new way of being in nature and grounds for hope? Dr. Russo and I will now introduce the speakers. I will start with Jeremy J. Julius. Sorry, this is when I need to go to the side. Julius, a fisherman, former chairman and councilman at Lamination, is a board member of Cecilia. Jay was a leader in the fight to protect Cherry Point from the coal terminal building plans. Dr. Scott Pratt is professor of philosophy at the University of Oregon. He's a co-founder and past president of the Josiah Roy Society, and he's past president of the Society of the Advancement of American Philosophy. His research focuses, among others, in American philosophy, including pragmatism, American feminism, philosophies of race, and Native American philosophy. I think we will introduce JoDe when he arrives. Do you want to introduce Jewell? Sure. Thank
you. Yeah, I just want to add, pardon my voice. I want to add a few more thoughts about Jay, and then I'd like to introduce Jewell. Jay was on the Lummi Nation government. He was on the council when his nation defeated what would have been North America's largest coal port. 50 million tons of coal would have gone to China. And Jay and his council and this man right here and his team killed it and provided inspiration to Standing Rock and other battles. And so I could go on about Jake. He's really an inspiration to all of us. And he's the president and founder of Cecilia. He's also a board member of the Tribal Salmon Alliance and a husband and father. And he always says, I'm just a fisherman. Jewell, what do you say about Jewell?
It's like a Tiger Woods introduction.
Jewell James and I have worked together since 1982. And I don't know where to begin, all things I've learned by working with him. But Jewell is the carver of that. He's one of the carvers of that totem pole out there, that orca, and of the Chinook salmon that are with it, and of another Chinook salmon that's on its way here. And he has carved totem poles for every single totem pole journey we've done since 2002. I want to mention one thing about that one journey, the first one. Jewell and I are working together to preserve an old-growth forest, which we succeeded in doing, but we wanted to stand a totem pole up there. And then 9/11 hit. And Jewell turned to me and he said, what about the children? All those children lost their parents. We got to take a totem pole to New York. I'll carve a totem pole from New York. Bring some healing to those families. And he did. And it was taken across this country and blessed by 18 different tribes. Put prayers into it. This man right here, Sitkikanem, can you stand up? This is Jewell's a little older brother, and also carves with him. He's another great man in my life anyway. Thank you, Sitkikanem. He was on that journey. This is his spouse, Siamawit. She has braved the totem pole journeys. But Jewell is the centerpiece of these in the sense that he's the balance point for the journeys and the inspiration for the journeys. And he has done sovereignty and treaty work for years. He was director of Lummi Natural Resources and many other things. And I would go on and on, but I won't. So, but I'm going to start with Jewell. And I have to say, I told Jewell, you know, I got these little signs. And I'm going to walk up here and I'm going to go, no. I said, I'm going to give you a 2-minute warning. And Jewell turned to me and he said, all these years and you still don't understand. So we'll start with Jewell James on the topic.
I appreciate being here, and I really want to thank my brother and his mate for traveling with us, and our nephew, Jay. You know, his dad was really close to us. We loved him dearly. And over the years, I've been fortunate to worked with Dr. Russo for the past 44 years. We traveled around the world and got involved in various indigenous rights campaigns in Africa and Brazil and Guatemala, Mexico, Chile, Australia. Been there, done that. We worked the United Nations in New York and Geneva. And sometimes I would accuse Dr. Russo of gerrymandering or setting it up so that when I'd fly home from Washington, D.C., I always had another ticket to go someplace. He would say, the chairman said, and off I would go to these distant places to battle on indigenous questions. All the campaigns that we've done over the past 4 decades plus, we won. We never ever lost a campaign. And so I appreciate the strategic design that Dr. Russo has contributed to our efforts. And we always laid out the campaigns and we always won. And for the last 20 years, we've done these totem pole journeys, and we always tried to reach out to coordinate with people, citizens, environmental groups, citizens organizations, churches, and Indian nations. But I understand that there's a kind of an ambiguous question, and we're supposed to ask some type of question and then give some type of answer. And I told him it reminds me of Levi Strauss on his book, The Way of the Mask. And I remember when I picked up that book, I thought, what is the way of the mask? Before I read it, that was the question I had in mind. And so I then read the book. And then I had to consider the impact of the book upon my understanding of what it is to be a Pacific Northwest indigenous person and the way that our elders are trying to teach us whenever we had encounters with them. I was fortunate because over the years I've had some Lummi elders that trained me on the recovery of ancestral bodies. And there's certain rules, regulations, protocols, and rituals and rites that you have to observe in order to prepare yourself to encounter the ancestors, to encounter the dead, to deal with that type of question as to whether or not you're qualified. Are you qualified to help resolve the disturbance that took place when our ancestors were dug up and were no longer at rest? My Indian name is Sasiath. It means younger than Seattle. We come from Chief Seattle's, one of his 3 sisters. And I always was intrigued by the idea that he said there's only a thin veil between us and them. You know, and living as an indigenous person, we always like to believe that we can be traditional. We can be somebody in the way of our ancestors, our elders. We could be that way too. You know, and we have our traditional societies, and we've battled in the past to try to recover Native American spiritual rights. We helped get involved in campaigns to recover the peyote when Oregon versus Smith took it away from our people. We could no longer practice the 10,000-year plus old religion that was indigenous to this nation before we were ever discovered. They took away eagle feathers. They raided the Lummi people because the Lummi people had eagle feathers. They kicked in the doors and went in and a grandma's house and made her and her grandchildren stand naked in the corner while they went through flour and sugar and emptied the cabinets and turned over the beds looking for the hidden eagle feathers, saying it was a violation of the Bald Eagle Protection Act. Native American prisoners were not being given the rights to ritual because there's no understanding. You see, it's this Christian orientation and understanding of what they think indigenous peoples are. I was happy to be able to work with a national group of indigenous elders, traditional elders that were involved and engaged in the recovery of these rights that were being lost. And, you know, people say in 1978, the American Indian Religious Freedom Act was passed and we got rights. We didn't get rights. The corporation stripped it of all teeth. And the Supreme Court began to strip it even more by their decisions in various cases dealing with indigenous rights. And so in the 1990s, we were able to recover some of those rights. We got peyote back. We got the rights to eagle feathers back. Federal Native prisoners got the rights to rituals back. And it was amendments to the American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978. In the 1990s, we're talking about the 1990s, And so over the years, I was happy to be involved in debates over in the United Nations on the rights of Indigenous peoples under the draft UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And when it was finally passed, the United States, Canada, and Australia and New Zealand were holdouts. They did not want to accept it. And I'm happy to say that I drafted the position paper that went to the American Indian Law Institute that then took it from the political, social orientations I had written in based on my understanding of Native American, Indigenous rights and traditional rights and spiritual rights. And they redrafted it so that President Obama could understand it based on his legal experience and training. And of course, we knew the president was backed in the corner and would want to give Indian countries something. So the United States accepted the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I always say that 17 and a half parts of those articles that are in it deals with culture or traditional knowledge, rights of song, dance, and ceremony, the rights of language of indigenous communities. And so even though the United States have accepted it, we still have to determine as indigenous nations if we are truly sovereign as to whether or not we're going to accept the relationship that is proposed by the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It's a two-party system, and every Indian nation has to make the final determination as to whether or not they're in a position where they will work with the United States and make demands upon the United States to work with us so that we can continue to recover for some of the damages that were done to our understandings on what is traditional and what is spiritual, what is the knowledge that we need to regain. We believe that we've been suffering from cultural side, we're in genocide, and we're witnessing ecocide. We're surrounded where the water and the air and the animals and the trees and everything is being destroyed around us. You know, and we're talking about, well, you know, we're going to go up into the land of the Nez Perce, the Shoshone, and the Bannock, and the Umatillas, and the Cayuse. And Joel Palmer from Oregon was the governor of the Oregon Territory, and he went in there and negotiated with them, along with Isaac Stevens from Washington Territory, and they're making promises. As long as the rivers shall flow and the grass shall go. And Dr. Russo and I were making a joke about it. Well, what they meant was, as long as their commerce shall flow, and their profits shall grow. That's what it became. It was all about profit, which means exploitation of the world around us, which means that we're a hindrance to that because our traditional teachings kept us connected to the earth around us. And as long as we're connected to the earth with our traditional teachings and traditional knowledge, traditional song, dance, and ceremonies and regalias and symbols, in our traditional spirituality, and then we're not going to just walk away and allow them to do what they want. We're going to demand some changes in the relationship. And so the United States has spent a century and a half, almost its total existence, trying to wipe out the indigenous frame of reference, the indigenous knowledge, the indigenous teachings. You know, in preparation for doing any spiritual work, there are certain protocols or requirements. You have to understand, first of all, that it's like a triangle. You yourself, if you're a sovereign person, you're supposed to understand who you are. You have a body. What are you doing to make sure that that body is healthy? What do you personally do to keep your body healthy? You have a mind. What do you do to keep that mind healthy, to keep expanding your understandings of the great cosmos, let alone the world immediately around you? Then you have a soul or a spirit. What do you do to make sure that that spirit or that soul is healthy? You know, you could be a Christian, you could be a pagan, you could be an indigenous person tied up in some of the indigenous rituals that are preparing you for understanding of how to become a whole being. If you have a weak body, then the mind and the soul is going to die off. If you have a weak mind, your body and the soul will die off. If you have a weak soul, then your body and your mind will die off. You have to keep all of them strong at the same time. So there were traditional teachings. You have to have physical balance or physical harmony. You had to know the limits of your body, but continue to train your body. You know, and there's a reason why we went to the mountains and bathed in the ice waters. There's a relationship with the water and the mountain and the sky and the air. And You had to have a social balance. You know, if you insult people or hurt people, no matter how much you prepare yourself, their thoughts will follow you. Their thoughts could damage you. That's a traditional teaching. You had to have mental harmony, environmental harmony. You had to know about sacred space and sacred time. You know, and you had to have spiritual harmony. And so yet there's laws of harmony that was taught, and the elders did it in various ways, all working together. And if you listen to all of them, then they collectively gave you the rules, the protocols on how to prepare yourself. You know, and you experience the world by seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, and smelling. And you judge the world. That's how you measure the world around you. But I want you to think about this room right here. Look at this room. This room is full of pos ions, and it's full of formaldehyde. It's coming and leaking out. You think it smells like a new room. That's toxic smell, chemicals you're smelling. The only thing not creating illness for you is the glass. But the air itself is pos ion charged, and that will cause depression. And if you keep it up, it'll cause cancer. The only thing that can take that out of the air is broadleaf shade plants, something created by nature itself. There's no filter. You know, so yeah, this room is clean, but it's not what you think it is because how narrow your measuring stick is. And so, thank you. I say it, this is the first time I ever listened to Kurt and stopped on time. So, there you go.
And I'd be happy to defer time. Is this on, or does this need to be switched on? We're good? Okay. Thank you. Watatlam I Tlaelkton Sanasnat Haishka Siam Nishchalacha Siam. English language, being our new language, is hard for us to put into words who we are. Jewell has obviously gotten extremely educated over his lifetime, some law and many other things, books, and he's developed a way to deliver to you a message, a story. And I often ask the question, I spoke at UW a couple of months ago, spoke at MIT last week, and we have to ask ourselves the question and look at it from the English word lens. What is environment? What is climate? What is change? Or environment is what? And when we Google these words, I think right now, who we are today, what we are today, we have a program within our mind that automatically jumps to this or jumps to that. And I think the struggles across the country and across the world, and I can only speak for myself and my family, my work with Jewell and Doug and Siamawet and Kurt and others with our struggles in our little puddle in our world up in Lummi, Washington. The differences in philosophies and the way we see the world. Jewell mentioned 1855, 1851, treaties were entered into, and to you students and to actually all of us here, that seems like a long time ago. But when you put little rectangulars and those indicate decades, it's only been about 16 and a half decades since our world completely changed. And to put that into perspective, I try to share a little bit of my story. I'm 46. And I got to live with 4 generations. And the oldest was born in 1888 and 1892. And each died when I was 5 and 6 years old, great-grandma and great-grandpa. But then to help us all understand where and who were they raised by, they were raised by individuals pre-contact. So, conversations about the struggles, the fights, whether we could or couldn't say a prayer in our way, live the way that we have lived since time immemorial, one with. And I think that's an important question if I leave this room right now at this moment in time. What is it to be one with? Because that's what we are as Indigenous people. We've never severed that relationship. We've never separated or divorced ourselves from being one with. And that's something we hold on to, and we have one foot over here in that world, in the natural world, where we hold on to those philosophies. We hold on to that oneness. And why is that important? I think it's fair to say we all love our mothers. We all love our grandmothers. They give us life. Dads can play a part in that, but the mother is the most important. And that life-giving process in us, it doesn't have to be taught. It's something that we're born with, that we have this deep love. We have this willingness to die for. We have this willingness to protect. And our mothers being the giver of life, that love, when you have that oneness with nature, which we don't have to be taught or told to do, the fact that we haven't severed that relationship, we haven't developed a dominant mentality over, a supremacy over these living things that we are one with, that we are connected to. For me, I think that's one of the most important things, because we've developed a behavior that we are supreme to. And we can drive to extinction certain things at the expense of, so that we can benefit why. And there's a lot of questions I think we can ask, but one of the most important for me, I think, is if that relationship and if that oneness was severed, if that divorce took place somewhere along the lines, where did that happen? Why did that happen? And what are the consequences? Because it really does have a lot to do with where we are today, in my mind, as a fisherman. As a fisherman who's like a farmer who's proud to be a farmer for 6 generations in this country. I am proud. And there's no other place I would have rather been born, or family I would have rather been born into, than a multi-hundred generation of people of the sea, of salmon people. That's what I am. I'm a salmon person. And like the Quathalmachtan, and in your language, killer whale, or orca, or blackfish, but it's called Quathalmachtan in our language. Like them, we have lived as one, side by side, and we learn so much about ceremony from Quathalmachtan. When newcomers or others from different places, from different areas, come in, there's a ceremony first, and I like to believe in my own fisherman mind that it's an invitation process. Welcome to my home. And they have this ceremony, and they come together, and they're head to head, all the pods. And there's communication that goes on in a ceremony. And I like to believe it's an invitation process that's been going on as salmon people under the sea for thousands of years. We don't know. Most of us can't speak their language. We have a tough time hearing, even when they're pushing their babies for 17 days saying, look at what's happening to me. We still have a tough time hearing them and having that empathy for them. But that connection and that oneness creates a love, I think, that we all need if we want to understand one another, or Indigenous perspectives and philosophies on why we do what we do, why we follow what Jewell has done historically in the past that I am so proud of. My grandfather. Narratives nowadays are created, and it's who can control the narrative, and getting our story out, not to divide, but have a place at the table, And typically it's not just for us, it's for you too. It's for those that don't have a voice. And one thing that really lives in me and made sense, and I thought my grandma was really mean in her teaching philosophies, but walking the beach with her one day, and I don't know, 4, 5, 6, and I love sports. I love throwing rocks, getting a stick and hitting rocks. And one day I threw a rock and it hit other rocks and it split in half and it made a buzz sound. And she grabbed my shoulders and she scolded me and said, "Shame on you. You leave my rocks alone. Did you hear it cry when you broke it? Don't you know these rocks are alive? Don't you know they hold our stories and know our songs and have seen so much?" And we can believe what we want, but we all have different teaching philosophies, and I think my grandmother had an urgency within her to teach that everything is alive, whether we believe it or not. And when everything is alive, we'll not look at the monetary value that something might provide for us and carry on into our future generations in a bank account, but if we're all connected and if everything is alive, like the rivers, like the water, like the rocks and trees. And I've never considered myself a tree hugger or an environmentalist, just an individual who was raised by pre-contact individuals who were raised by individuals who have always been in harmony, as Jewell said, in tune with nature. Nature is not something separate. We are nature. And I'm not sure, I've never been to a university as far as an educational process, but one of the biggest missing links, I think, in my opinion, is just that, is the importance of teaching who we are, what we are, connection to. And as we travel back, and we're time travelers. Still today, we're time travelers. Our ancestors are important. Our ancestors' philosophies are important. And time traveling is important. And taking a walk back in time to just 500 years ago, when the trees were so big it would take 8 of us in this room to lock our hands together and wrap around. What does that mean? This wasn't all we see. It only took 160 years to do what has been done here. But if we can travel back in time, teleport ourselves back in time to see what the natural garden once was, not to point the finger and say that this is all wrong, but if environment and climate change is a conversation that we're going to continue to have into the future, then we have to reflect on what got us to where we are today. We have to consider and look at indigenous philosophies that did a pretty damn good job of being stewards, custodians, and one with for a long, long, long time. And we don't have to adopt all. I mean, that would be nice, but I think that's what's going to help us ensure a future and for our future generations. And we're on this totem pole journey, and the totem pole represents and symbolizes so much. There's so much in that story, and I'm thankful for the carvers, but things are alive. JoDe's river, I don't speak for the Columbia and the Snake, but I stand with personally as a family member, as a friend, as a relative from the Salish Sea. The river has become a lake. In God's garden, this Creator's garden, or this natural world, however we look at it, it wasn't intended to be that. And there's a repercussion, a ripple effect taking place. And the extinction of a people is before us right now, and we have to consider that too. Thank you for this opportunity to share a few thoughts. Haishka.
Before we, the gentleman that came in is JoDe Goudy, and he's former chairman of the Yakima Nation. He is the founder of Red Thought, and Vice President of Cecilia, and you're also with the Tribal Salmon Alliance, correct? No, maybe. You're not. Maybe, if you want. And he was also one of the individuals that was very involved in making sure there wasn't a coal port or coal trains coming through his territory. And if you don't mind, I would like to, JoDe, thank you for coming. I know it was a race to be here. And the idea of this session is, and you've talked about this a lot, if you want these people to better understand what you're trying to communicate to them, what question do they need to have in their mind to be able to understand what you're saying?
Thank you, Kurt. Nich, what are we at? Nich pachwai. Wanakshash chaikwach. Anaku chikuk nayaku sha nak panitash wapatat wit. Kanam tan khutki nak panita ilwit. Kushnwa patata kanwata shukani ayayat kni mimi. Nami twanatash ach danan wit wanatash. I want to say good afternoon to each and every one of you. My name is Chaikwach. My English name is JoDe Goudy, and I appreciate Kurt for the introduction. I would say first and foremost that my native name identifies who I am. In our ways, each of our nations, we carry respective ceremonies, and receiving of a name early in childhood is something that goes on within our way of life as well as many others. And so that has a lot to do with what I am and who I am. But I guess it isn't one question that I would ask each of you. I think I would start with 6 questions, okay? Now, they're simple questions, but they're extremely complicated answers if you really get into it. First question, who are you? Shinamonisha. Who are you? Second question, Manaknik Namwa. Where do you come from? Third question, Tuyanum Shnawa. Where are you going? All right. Fourth question, what is? What is? Fifth question, what isn't? All right. And the last question, which is take you down the rabbit hole, why? Why? I think that what the collective picture of the challenges that we're discussing here today, along with so many others, it comes under a foundation that we all are viewing it from various awarenesses, cognitive awareness, our own versions of reality. Those versions of reality are founded upon, in my estimation and in my thought process, those 6 questions. There's a few more, but we'll be talking for a long time if we get into the other questions. But I would ask that to yourselves. And so, it could be a simple exercise. You can say, well, my name is JoDe, and my native name is Chaikwach, and I'm a Yakima native. I come from other different bands. I was born a man in this world. I'm a son. I'm a grandson. I'm a father. I'm a husband. Those are all practical answers. Practical answers of what we can identify. It's somewhat, I guess you can say, into the black and white world of what is and what isn't. But I think the ultimate answer that I've come to, because those questions come with a traditional foundation. My elders were the ones, and they started me with the first 3. Who are you? Where do you come from? And where are you going? All right. And so those come with traditional teachings. But I think from an original Free Nation perspective, I'm an enrolled Yakima of the Yakima Nation. I carry blood from other nations, I guess you can call them. But what I think we're dealing with is various views on a picture. And so when you look at that picture, and when I look at that picture, when Jewell and the others, Jay and the others look at this picture, I guess the question is, are we all looking at the same picture? Are we all looking at that same picture? Because from an original Free Nation perspective, a native person who's been brought into this world, one of the things that one of my elders, my Tilla, my grandfather, I think one of the biggest components that I've tried to carry in my heart is a saying, a teaching, and it goes, Chi tamanwetiwa patoki na miao twanatash. This way of life was set down to follow. Chow na miao naknoitash, not to take care of. Mishnakwit kwitki atwanata kuinaknoyaita na miachaichwit. And if you follow this way of life correctly, it is this way of life that turns around to become the caretaker of you. See, there's an assertion, and I know Jay touched upon it, and I'm sure Jewell probably mentioned it as well. And that assertion is a perspective of reality of dominance, to assert dominance. And unfortunately, society in as a whole, or as a larger part of society, is founded upon that expression or that principle or that thought process, the exertion of dominance. And it comes, in a sense, from, I guess you can say it comes from the Old Testament, and even previous. There's assertions and thoughts and philosophies that were brought throughout time to exert a spirit in our principle, our will of dominance. And so what's into the practical side of things for the United States, it has formally adopted that principle of dominance into the formation of its governance, into the executive, the judicial, and the legislative branches. And so you can say, well, is that just by theory or by thought or by principle? No, I'm telling you that the United States utilizes as the foundation of federal Indian law / property law, a false religious pretense as the justification to assert domination over all lands, waters, and said inhabitants that they deem to be heathens and infidels. All right, this is based historically upon the assertion of the doctrine of Christian discovery. And so that foundation is a principle that lives today. It lives right now in the current U.S. Supreme Court case law. It lives as the foundation to the assertions of the mannerism by which the legislative branch was able to change, manipulate, alter, and or abrogate treaties. That goes through historical case law back to U.S. v. Kagma, Lone Wolf versus Hitchcock. There's an extra constitutional authority that was asserted to the legislative branch of the United States to change the rules as they go, as they see fit. And what materialized after that was a number of legislative acts that essentially, this is how the assertions of the Lummi Treaty and all the other respective treaties of the original free nations have been overcome. This is how you change the rules as you go. And it's an extra constitutional authority, which means it's not in the Constitution. They made it up out of thin air in U.S. v. Kagma. And they reaffirmed it in U.S. And Lone Wolf versus Hitchcock. And so for a practical question, when it comes to the original free existence of our peoples and nations, going back more into the simplicity of life, okay? What separates me in a practical sense from anything else in this world as far as my identity? Well, if you take away my language, if you take away my relationship with the ceremonies, with the foods, our traditional foods, and other aspects of our way of life, in a sense, I become no different than anybody else. These things are what maintains our identity at its core. It is what has sustained our existence since time immemorial. Because as Lummi and as Yakima and other original free nations, native nations, we all have our creation stories. And they're not from some other continent, all right? Our creation stories are here, all right? And science is catching up, as decades pass by to reaffirm that, what our people have expressed since time immemorial. And so you get back to the core of that existence. This way of life was set down to follow versus to take care of. And take care of is an exertion that falls in line with the exertion of dominance. All right. And so for our native peoples, as we continue to carry on and try to sustain our ways of life, our languages, our ceremonies, our practices, what we are faced with, obviously, is a big imposition of a different thought process. And so we have a problem as a whole as far as society is concerned, and that problem is consumption. All right, we consume. But then we start getting into the exercises of why we are justifying that consumption. Those exercises are based, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, in the thought process of the questions of who you are, where you come from, where you are going, what is, what isn't, and why. That is the foundation of the identity on how you make decisions, how you made a decision to walk into the door this day, how you're making a decision to either sit and listen or get up and stand, go to the restroom, whatever it may be, whether you are consciously or subconsciously reacting and making decisions, every crossroad is based upon the foundation of those 6 questions. And so as an individual, okay, you may become aware at a higher level of who you are and where you come from, where you're going. But how do you carry that forward into your home? How do you carry that forward into your community? How do you carry that forward into your nation? How do you carry that forward into the larger aspect of society in general? Because I think that through the aspects of dispute resolution, all right, that are provided today, that being the judicial system, the advocacy of new law through the legislative branch, the deck is stacked against you, and the rules continuously change as you go. All right, that's the reality of the situation. And so how do you combat that? How do you come against that? Well, I think you continuously practice your way of life, and in the advocacy of understanding that you can't make anybody do anything, really, unless you're a dominator. If you're a dominator, of course you can exert domination upon an individual or a people, a race. And ultimately, I think when thoughts are manifesting into actions where the outcomes are irresponsible decisions, be it for the water, be it for the fish, be it for the land or the other resources that we all take part in, all right, that's a detriment, obviously, to the society as a whole, all right? But the justification of that comes from the spirit of domination. And then you have the advocates who are saying, well, we need a better balance here, all right? I think those advocates need to continue to refine the understanding of those 6 questions, because the University of Oregon should answer those 6 questions, because all entities have them. The United States needs to answer those 6 questions, all right? The state of Oregon, the state of Washington, they need to answer those 6 questions. Where did you come from? How did you come to be today? What is the governing documents that manifested what we understand to be reality? And I think that's an exercise that we all need to do, because when we can begin to get to that level, then we'll get to the same picture. And it's only when we arrive at that somewhat similar picture, then we can begin to establish a responsible discussion about what solutions are as far as sustained existence, not only for the native ways of life, nations and peoples, but for all ways of life into the future, as far as we can understand and see. And so now they're telling me I got time, and I guess Jewell and Jay, they behave themselves and cut themselves off that time. But you're listening to the 3 guys that never drop a mic. You give it to us, and so I better follow suit. But I appreciate the ability to share a little bit. I think that ask yourself those questions. Ask yourself those questions, and then observe how other entities and things, what those questions, how they interrelate. And I think that'll give you a good starting place to get to a picture to say, all right, Jewell, Jay, JoDe, we're ready to have a responsible, respectful communication about what is, what isn't, and why. Thank you.
My name is Scott Pratt. I'm a professor in the philosophy department, and it, of course, is an honor to follow these 3 gentlemen. If you wonder to yourself, what should I... my mic is off? It's probably better if it's off. It's on.
It's actually on, but
You need to speak closer, the mouth closer.
Do I need to?
yes.
Okay. I've got it. I'll start again. Thank you, Jay and Jewell and JoDe. If one was looking for a way to engage philosophically in a conversation today, you've heard 3 philosophers already do it. My role in all of this is to talk a little bit from a non-native perspective and how we non-natives can stand in relation to the sort of views and calls for activism that you've heard here today. I'm from the Midwest. I'm from the Sauk and Fox lands of northern Illinois, where I grew up. My family was mostly farmers and teachers. And I came to do philosophy along the way to talk about American philosophy, philosophy born of the land, in effect, the philosophy that is here. This was understood initially as something that was literally not about the land here, but rather was about philosophy not done here that shows up on the shores. In my work, I came to be convinced that you can't do philosophy in America without listening closely to the philosophies that grow from this place. And in light of what you've heard, you probably already appreciate the fact that there are distinctive philosophical views that play a role in how not just the people who were here were to be, but how those of us who came to be here need to think about ourselves in this context. The notion that we operate in a world where a conception of dominance is the one that frames our relationships is really important to get hold of. How to deal with that, I think, goes to JoDe's questions. We have to ask those philosophical questions about who we are and where we are from and where we are going in order to be able to respond to the kind of challenge that's been laid down by indigenous peoples, not just now, but since Europeans first showed up here. Now, my work as a philosopher has been an effort to listen to the philosophers, the indigenous philosophers who've been trying to say things to the Europeans who arrived for hundreds of years. There have always been people who stand at the border trying to tell the people who arrived how to be better part of the place they are. I think you've heard examples of that today. The theme of the conversation is around the notion of how ceremony and science might fit together. And that, especially for those of us who are academics in the room, those of us who are philosophers and academics who are interested in doing things like research, developing knowledge and so forth, thinking about the ways in which ceremony and science interact is a really good way of thinking about how we can answer the questions that JoDe has proposed today. I just want to say very briefly three sort of categories of things. The first one is the relationship between science and ceremony. Now, as I said, I'm non-native, but part of what I'm trying to do is listen to indigenous accounts of the kinds of things we're doing and make it part of the practices that we then adopt. Now, there's an author named Gregory Cajete, who's Tewa from Santa Clara Pueblo, who's written a book called Native Science. If you haven't read it, you might read it. And he talks about the role of ceremony. He says ceremony is both a context for transferring knowledge and a way to remember the responsibility we have to our relationships with life. Native ceremony is associated with maintaining and restoring balance, renewal, cultivating relationship, and creative participation with nature. He goes on to link that notion with a kind of metaphysical view, a view of what nature is. As Jay said, we are nature. What does that mean? Gregory Cajete says this. He says, traditional indigenous peoples understood that compacts, agreements, must be made between sources of life, the land, their place, and with the natural entities there. The key relationship they established are reflected in ceremonies. Ceremonies and rituals choreograph situations to bring people in contact with those compacts. The entities involved in relationships. The ceremonies themselves become ways of coming to know, of understanding. In so-called Western science, ceremony, I actually was talking to some colleagues about this, there is a notion of ceremony in Western science. It's found in the practices like filing LRB applications and cleaning equipment and sort of making sure you show up on time and taking notes in the right way and so forth. Why? All to preserve a sense of objectivity, to see the world in a particular way where the things you look at are not players in the conversation, but passive, things that you can look at, but don't imagine that they're looking back. The starting point for thinking about the role of ceremony in Western science is to recognize that there are other notions of ceremony. The idea that ceremony is a way of knowing things by establishing and carrying on relations of the sort we've just heard about is essential to the practice. In a minute, I'll ask you some questions that hopefully you can think about in this context, especially those of you who find yourselves as researchers. What we stand in relationship to when we conduct science, when we ask questions about the world, is a world in which things are understood differently. And I couldn't come up with better words than the ones you've just heard, but I want to borrow some words from Francis LaFleche, who is an Omaha native, who, writing in 1911, said this about the world. He said, "An invisible and continuous life permeates all things, seen and unseen. This life manifests itself in two ways. First, by causing to move. All motion, all actions of mind or body are because of this invisible life. Second, by causing permanency of structure and form, as in the rock. The physical features of this landscape, mountains, plains, streams, rivers, lakes, and the animals and humans. This invisible life was also conceived of as being similar to the willpower of which humans are conscious within themselves, a power by which things are brought to pass. Through this mysterious life and power, all things are related to one another and to man. The unseen to the seen to the unseen, the dead to the living, a fragment of anything in its entirety. This invisible life is called power, or Wakanda. The result is what Vine Deloria Jr. called a moral universe." He said this. That Vine Deloria Jr., Standing Rock Sioux. He says this: "That is to say, there is a proper way to live in the universe. There is a content of every action, behavior, and belief. The sum total of our life experiences has a reality. There is a direction to the universe. Nothing has incidental meaning, and there are no coincidences. No body of knowledge exists for its own sake outside the moral framework of understanding. We are, in the truest sense possible, creators or co-creators with the higher powers, and what we do has immediate importance to the rest of the universe." This, I think, this view, if this is what we encounter as researchers, as scholars, as scientists, there are four things to think about. The first one is, what does cause mean? Our usual notion of cause is that cause is mechanical. We set up a bunch of natural laws and we derive what happens next. But if the players in this world are not mechanisms, but are people with interests, then causation becomes something else, a kind of agent causation, where those we interact with are making judgments just as we are. So think about causation. Think about anomalies. Anomalies are things that in Western science defeat us. We try to set them aside. The more anomalies, the worse our hypothesis. In fact, from an indigenous perspective of the sort Deloria is talking about, if anomalies show up, that means something else is going on, and we should pay attention because there are other agents trying to tell us something, and we should listen. Third, science from a Western perspective is coercive and not cooperative. If the objects you're trying to understand are passive and you're trying to make them respond, think about experiments where you hold something fixed and then you poke it to see what happens. It's an effort to coerce knowledge from the world. If you're interacting with others, then in fact what you do is you ask them, you observe, you interact. And then fourth, this all generates a picture of knowing that's very different from our standard. That is, we are not trying to know things, we are trying to know others. Lorraine Code, a feminist philosopher, wrote a book about that sort of process of knowing, the process of knowing others. But Code only included human beings in the picture. What you've heard here is that there are a whole lot of other agents out there. And knowing the things in the world, rocks and trees and streams and so forth, is a process not of knowing things, but of knowing others. Now, the questions, very briefly. If you're a scientist asking questions, what does it mean when the things you're asking are actually players in the conversation? How does that change your methodology? Second, we think that logic orders our ways of giving arguments and presenting results. But is it the case that if the world is filled with agents and we're interacting with them, that we can proceed the way we have, where we do sort of deductive outcomes and so forth? As you sit down to think about your hypotheses and what follows, think about that in a context where not everything happens because it is predetermined by a deductive system, but rather is because the players decided that they wanted to do it that way. So I'm just going to read a last quotation from Vine Deloria Jr. He summarizes the value of knowledge and ceremony in an agential world in comparison with knowledge of what he calls frozen thought. He says, the substance of the universe is relationships, the symmetries and their structure. Indians say we are all relatives. Modern physics seeks to uncover the final piece of the puzzle in its pursuit of the Higgs boson, believing that in finding this elusive particle, they will have only completed the logical circle and described the physical universe, which is, after all, merely a frozen thought. In their ceremonies, medicine men are able to change the world and present it with new paths to follow. By healing, predicting, and locating lost objects, they cancel out the determinism of the physical and create different worlds that are consonant with the activities and direction of the world behind appearances. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you for sharing this first round of ideas and perspective. Let's have just a moment of pause, not a break, but just to give you the opportunity to think whether you have something to contribute to this discussion. What you have to contribute could be a question, an idea, a thought. We have framed it at the beginning as a potlatch of ideas. So while we're moving on to the next round, which will be the opportunity for all of the panelists to add something in the inspiration of this conversation, to comment onto each other, or you know, whatever you feel in the flow that works in this going around the table for the conversation. Take some time also to write, if you haven't done so that yet, to write your cards, to write your contribution, and you can hand them over to Sarah, Marsha, and Ruby, who's back there. If you can just move the card, so having that as a flow going on in this opportunity. I said at the beginning this should have happened during the first round, but I couldn't have myself because I was too captured by the intensity of the contribution that we have heard, which is why we need maybe this little moment to open up this possibility, and also to give our panelists the opportunity to think about what they would like to add to the conversation. And I think we could probably also turn off the screen at this point, because I think it's bothering, disturbing Jay. Thank you.
To the panelists, the idea of this round was for you four to have a conversation about what you heard from each other. It's a conversation as if you're the only ones in the room, whatever, but to have a conversation, not a debate, a conversation. And we're hoping that works. I know it's a difficult thing to do in front of strangers, but they're all family. So we'd like you four to have a conversation about the words that were shared here, wherever you want to start.
You know, it's really hard to try to steer people along a path that they may not want to walk, to try to guide them in the thoughts they should have while they're on that path. Because we all grew up with our limited understanding. We go through life trying to gather more and more information that will give us some type of clarity of purpose, or heal us, to give us self-confidence that we're all right, we're okay, we belong here, we're a somebody. Life around us just seems to put hurdle after hurdle after hurdle before us. And we become worried about all of that because it seems like we're surrounded by chaos. But we can only jump one hurdle at a time. And you have to prepare yourself before you ever jump, or you'll never make it. You have to believe that you can jump that hurdle before you ever try. And when you finally get over it, that's just the first step, because life is going to continue like that. I was thinking, how do you explain what is real and not real? I was going back to my carving shop 25 years ago, and I recently, back then I had some gravel brought in because my driveway was kind of in disarray, and I had it spread, and I never thought anything about it. And that Saturday morning, I went back to my carving shop, and all of a sudden, it felt like something pushed my foot an extra 1.5 feet away, and I almost, like I was stepping on an ice bubble, and I staggered and gained my composure and went out and searched for what I was searching for. I was coming back, and I got to the same spot, and it happened again. It felt like something went like this and pushed my foot. And so I staggered, and I gained my composure. I started walking, and then I realized, no, I'm sorry. And I went back, and I said, I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to step on you. And I looked down, and there was a rock that had the face of like the Indian on the Indian head nickel. Looked just like him. He didn't want to be stepped on. And I kept him for a long time. I don't know where that rock went. You know, I was coming out of a peyote meeting, and at midnight, taking a break, and the sky was full of stars and a full moon. I was there for a purpose, for healing. But I looked up, along with my cousin, who wanted to be here and witness what's going on here today, but she couldn't come here. But she was there with me, and we watched this cloud form into an eagle flying, and it moved towards the moon, and then it formed into a wolf running with his tail straight back. And we continued to watch it, and then it formed into a man dancing. One hand down, one hand up, one leg down. And he danced across the ring that was around the moon. And it was rainbowed. Colored him rainbow as he went through. It was the most beautiful thing. You know, and we're so lucky to witness those things. You know, we think we know what life is. My brother brought me up. I was thinking about my brother sitting up here. I lost my son. He brought me to the mountains to bathe in the ice waters to try to wash it off. It was so cold that morning. And he went on back to start walking towards where the Econoline Ford was parked. And as I was walking out, I looked at this moss-covered log, and there was a pure white flower growing out of it with 2 petals, about 4 inches tall. Pure white, albino. I said, wow. And I picked it. And I carried it out, and we got to his Econoline. I said, look what I found, brother. It's a pure white flower growing out of moss in the forest. Yeah, and his Econoline Ford did not have a thermostat, so it took forever to warm up. And as we're shivering because we're so cold from doing our ceremony, I was saying, I'm going to bring it up to Western Washington University. Maybe they'll name it after me. This is cool. I'm so proud to I found it. As we're talking, it melted and became a puddle of water. You know, there are so many things around us that we don't understand. You know, I'm always, sometimes I cry because the Great Spirit gave me a vision. I've had near-death experiences, near-death visions. I'm a dreamer. I get to see dreams, and I see things before they happen. And I walk in life wondering, are you in my dream? Are you a part of my dream? How do you fit into my dream? How do you fit into the vision? Are you supposed to be here? You know, and I just seek to try to find a way to sacrifice a little more, to try to earn the right for the Spirit to show me something, just a little more, a little more. My brother sings the song of the whale, that when we tried to save the whale, she gave us her song before she died. I've had songs come from dreams at daybreak, you know, and but you have to believe. Are you prepared to believe? Are you prepared to accept the idea that there's something bigger than us, something greater than us, that we're here for a purpose, we're here for a reason? And how are we sacrificing? What are we doing? What are you doing to sacrifice and give back? The traditional elders say, don't forget, when you get up in the morning, something's going to die for you today. Do you appreciate that? That something will die for you today. We should try to always keep in mind that it is up to us to try to implant an understanding. But how can we do it if it becomes too complex for our children to understand? That's why I challenge the churches to change. All they have to do is, as institutions, is begin every sermon, every gathering, with the idea that God created all things are sacred. Then go on and condemn them to hell if you want, but at least you implanted that idea. And if they would have done that, started that in 1987 with the Apology of Churches in the Pacific Northwest, 40 years of children would have grown up being encouraged by the churches to believe they're walking in a sacred environment.
Kurt, a conversation about what was shared amongst us? You know, Vine Deloria was a good friend of my grandfather's, and as you quoted him, and he was a professor at Western, lived in Lummi territory for some time, and spent a lot of time with Lummies. In one of his books, I've read, I think I've read them all. But one thing that really stands out and makes me proud of Jewell, proud of the leaders. Jewell wasn't elected at one point, but when the elected leadership said, Jewell, we need to get here, we need this, the outside world doesn't understand this, and we know this, but we need to get to here. And Jewell would take that directive and work with the leadership and get us to there. And but Vine Deloria said he wished that all the tribes in the United States, and he named the number, had the will, the political will, the courage, the strength to fight the fights for the things that couldn't speak, earth, treaty rights, like these little tiny tribes, Lummi tribe. He named off a couple of more. But coming from Vine, that and him witnessing his friends and the Lummi people holding on to and refusing to sever that relationship, that oneness, to allow our imaginations to become colonized. He witnessed Lummi refusing to do just that. And we're still very imaginative. We hold on to the old philosophies that are really simple. There's nothing, it's not a big mathematical puzzle that needs to be solved. It's really, kids have it, and it's common sense. And Vine Deloria says in one of his books also that send your kids to school, and I think he's talking to all of us and all of you. Education's important. Send them to school, but not at the expense of who they are. Who are you? Not at the expense of your roots, your culture. And I feel him talking to me as I talk to my children about the importance of getting an education, going to college. And because of Vine and others, because I think it starts in childhood with our children, that the important lessons in life and education is not in a school, not at a university. The most important foundation is who we are, and making sure we maintain that relationship, that relatedness with. For me, it's important as we continue on this journey. The journey, totem pole journey, has just begun. But we started at Bellingham Unitarian Fellowship, and we had an opportunity to share a few words there. And what I left with the audience that was important for me, and is important for me to leave with you and every citizen of the United States, is treaties aren't Indian things. Treaties are not Indian things, but I think that's subconsciously what we think, or what we're taught, or what we think we learned. We might imagine it as, oh, those Indian treaties, but the reality is an immigrant sovereign, and I'll just speak for my family, an immigrant sovereign asked for a meeting with the true sovereign, my family. And the two sovereigns, the true sovereign and the immigrant sovereign, United States, came together and entered into negotiations. So the forefathers of this country entered into an agreement with, well, just my family, JoDe's family at Yakima, Jewell's family, Doug and Siemowit's family. It's your treaty too. We find ourselves in situations where we're attempting to not have to face a reality of reburying family members because Indian law and justifications to do certain projects on top of my people. And this isn't 20 years ago. This isn't 50 years ago. This is right now, ladies and gentlemen. Right now, it's something we fight every single day. And I don't know if it's because there's no crosses and headstones on top of known archaeological and cemeteries of ours that things like this can be allowed, but this is something that goes on today. And oftentimes you'll see tribes have to put this treaty on the line, something that shouldn't have to be done. Something that we should all come out and say, hey, this is my damn treaty too, and we can't do this. We're an honorable people. We should be honoring this from both ends, and not let a court system that's designed to circumvent promises and guarantees and treaties of the past. So I would like to leave that with all of you, that it's not just an Indian thing. It's a matter of honor on both ends. And a treaty within the United States, according to the Constitution, is the supreme law of the land. And if we look at where we are today, as far as environmental degradation, catastrophic disruption to the natural world that has taken place, if the treaty was just honored, we wouldn't be where we are today. But as we move forward, I think if we can come together, we entered a marriage that not all of us wanted to enter into, but it's there. And we have to work together to get to the future. But I would like to, with what was shared today and discussed here, definitely important to share my thought around the treaty that it's yours too.
I'd like to ask JoDe a question. And I think there's a few people that like you to answer this too. Your 6 questions. It's really fascinating. The last one. Can you unpack the word why a little bit?
It all depends on how you answer the first 5. Was Gibran, yeah? When you found a path, don't say I've found the truth, but say I found a truth. You know, and so how is it that Kurt can have a version of reality that's 100% correct, and JoDe can have a version of reality that's also 100% correct? Well, in the buildup of understanding my answers to the first 5 questions, then you start delving into the why. But I think there's a critical point that, at least for myself, that I came to a while back. And I guess I can share a little bit, and you're going to have to forgive me, because I too was pushed in education. All my elders on both sides, mother's, father's side, very traditional, but they knew the importance of education, and they pushed me that way very hard. And so in my younger years, I was very aware of our traditional ways, our followings, but I was more along the lines of what someone might express or call chasing the American dream. Okay, and I chased that dream all the way to to Oregon State University. All right, and I was there for a couple of years, and anyone who knew me back in those days would say, "You're talking to a different guy than I knew." But ultimately, I think during that time period of my life, whether or not I knew it, I was asking myself some of those questions. And, you know, some people may call them a soul-searching exercise. Some may call them a young midlife crisis, you know. But ultimately, I was trying to figure out, what the heck am I doing? What is life about? What does this all mean? What am I doing here? Where did I come from? And ultimately, what's it all mean at the end? And from a practical sense, I just said, you know, to myself, well, ultimately, when I take my last breath on this earth, what will I be remembered for? And I tried to envision myself. Now, don't take my advice here. And my daughter's in the audience as well, and she's not to take my advice either. But I envisioned myself on every potential pathway that I thought I could have achieved from an educational standpoint in pursuit of the American dream. And I tried to look back upon a life in pursuit of that dream, and whether or not I felt sound in my heart, mind, body, and spirit about that. And ultimately, the answer was no. I tried to envision myself in any pathway there, no matter what professional career or whatever it was. There was something that was missing. And so ultimately, I had one of my best friends passed away in a car accident. I went back to his funeral. I grew up in Warm Springs, Oregon, actually. Went back to his funeral. I was at the ceremony. We have a long funeral process, and and it was at his funeral that I came to the realization, in the practice of our way of life, that I had forgotten who I was. That I could figure out anything in my mind, but what I couldn't figure out is why my heart wasn't agreeing with it, ultimately. And I made the determination, and I upset everybody. I left school, and I went back home, and I told myself, I'm going to learn everything I can about our traditional way of life. I'm going to relearn it. I knew it, but I didn't know it. And I'm still learning. I'll be learning to my last breath. That's a fact. All right, but that was the goal. But ultimately, when I made that determination, I started the process of what I determined in my own little mind and heart was my first prayer. All right, because as a younger person, I would be my greatest adversary with regard to, I determined myself to be a non-believer, you know. But that was my first prayer. Creator, Nami Anatla Tamanwatla, God, if you're real, prove it to me. All right. And so I talk to my kids about that. I talk to this story every now and then. And ultimately, I tell my kids, I said, we live in the top ramen generation, right? If you can't get your answer in 5 minutes, you're wrong, or you're lying, or you just don't know what you're talking about. But I'll tell you this much. I won at that question, all right? Creator, if you're real, prove it. And it took me probably about 4 or 5 years with extreme amounts of sacrifice, physical, mental, and spiritual discipline to get an answer that I could not deny. I could not deny. And so ultimately, I didn't know it then, but as I've evolved, because the answer to those 6 questions, whether or not I knew it back then and throughout time, as I've been answering them, those answers have changed. And they will change, I think, for everybody. I think that's the natural process of growing in life. But ultimately, I came to the determination that number one, in the answer to the question of who I am, number one, I am of creation. That's my number one answer. That's as far as I've taken my thought process and my prayer specific to that question. But I'll tell you this much. If you can come to that point for yourself, I believe it changes the context of every other question in its entirety. And so it therefore changes the question of why as well. And so that is best as I can tell you, because I'm not here to tell you that JoDe's path is the only path and it's the right path. No, you all have paths and there's all truths within them. You are all of creation, whether or not you believe it. That's the determination I'm making for you as I observe and interact with you. But I'm not going to sit there and judge you if you come up and tell me, hey, I don't believe that, or I answer those questions differently. That's great, because your truth is 100% true for you as well. Because ultimately, if you can get to that point to understand what that means, as you continuously go down that path to understand that you are of creation and what it means for the other questions, that's when you begin to go down truly into the rabbit hole with regard to what is, what isn't, and why. So, I better stop there, because you need some time, and you need some, and just like the anomalies that you speak of. Oh, there's all kinds of anomalies in life. I look for them all the time. It's more about listening, observing, and it's not so much about conscientiously making decisions and determinations that I'm going to do this or do that. It's more about following instructions and trying to observe communication from the spirit, whether or not anyone believes that or anything like that. I believe it. And I have a communication that helps and guides me in my decision and thought-making process, manifests my actions and all that. So, but I'll say this much: as far as technology and science, it is absolutely critical to where we are going collectively. It is absolutely critical, because in the determination of the practical reality with regard to the population base and the population base's consumption problem, science and technology will be one of the offsets to help sustain us into the future. But I think that the challenges specific to that for the bright and beautiful minds that are working within this university and others, educational institutions and all these things, is that as it be the dispute resolution process for more responsible decisions that are coming out of bright and beautiful minds are thereby being pushed down through the advocacy and lobbying efforts of creation of law, and who's getting these leaders who are making determinations and sustaining their positions of power in play. And so, I think society needs to look at the dispute resolution process for responsible decision making into the future, not only for Native people, but everybody. Because, and I'll tell you this, in the pursuit of those 6 questions, here's another one for you. What's the difference between a wishful thought and a prayer? What's the difference of that? Here's another one to think about. If you can get to that potentially kind of hinge upon the answer of I am of creation. So here's another one, right? Why do bad things happen to good people? Those are just questions. I'm not here to tell you I got the answer. I got answers for myself, but I'm not here to dictate answers for you. I'm saying that if you follow pursuit of those questions and others that perhaps come forth to you, you'll have a better understanding of what it is to have a foundation by which your will is coming forth to interact with individuals, entities, and other beings, I guess you can say, in a more respectful and a responsible way. And I'll stop there. Yeah.
Well, I would just add, especially from the perspective of someone who's not a native thinker in this context. I take a lot of direction and, in a sense, comfort from Vine Deloria Jr.'s book, We Talk, You Listen. If you haven't read it, I'd suggest, especially if you're a philosopher, you should read it. Because the message there is the message you've been hearing, which is those of us who are trying to approach and solve these problems cannot do it ourselves. And if we're going to do it, we have to do it by listening to the other participants in the problem. The notion that the treaties are ours too is a really important idea. And even though there are problems with the framework and so forth, as Jay pointed out, it is still an agreement that we entered into. And as parts of this community, we're responsible to it. I've sort of come to think about sort of our place in all of this from the perspective of not just Deloria, but the other native thinkers I've read, and even illustrated really well today. There's more worlds than one. And one of the challenges that we who are educated in the Western tradition face is the belief that there really is one. And as a result, I believe we are in a very narrow space. One that doesn't see the anomalies, that cannot hear others speaking, and so forth. To break that down requires that we engage with others and learn other ways to stand with them. And I think often of Luther Standing Bear, who was Lakota and published some books in the 1930s. In his last book, he made the claim, which I'm increasingly convinced is right. He says, only an Indian way of thinking can save America. He's, after laying out problems with the environment and problems with treaties and so forth, his claim was, in a sense, you need to listen. And then you need to act in accordance with the cooperation that emerges from that listening. So, for myself and hopefully my colleagues, we're here to do just that and to make that matter. All three of you have started out philosophically and ended what people would say is practically, talking about how things happen on the ground. We philosophers need to do that too. We need to take seriously the ideas and then see how they actually manifest in the ways we live. And so I, sort of commend you to listen to these speakers and think about how that changes how you go out into the world after this session.
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry, Jay, go ahead.
Just really quickly, I find myself over the last decade, maybe even longer, but really heavy during the Cherry Point Coalport fight. Lived it for 4.5 years straight, dreamt it, slept it. It was everything, consumed us. But I found myself asking, science is what? Or really digging deep into science, because the United States relies heavily on science. Universities, studies, scientific studies, all of these things. But I found, well, let me share this. An elder shared in front of an audience 50 times bigger than this. She stood up and she said, "We respect science. But we were here long before science. And we did a very good job of everything we're discussing. Typically when we're in front of an audience or a debate or at a public hearing for something, science is usually dominating the conversation. And during the fight with coal, and I'm just going to use one example, but there were many scientific studies identifying with precision cultural sites and cemeteries, and they won't be disturbed, and we'll pile 9 foot of dirt over the top, and then we'll put 52 million tons of coal over the top of your family, and it won't harm them, da-da-da-da-da. But one of the funny or fascinating ones was science determined that there wasn't much crab there where they were going to put this 3,000-foot dock. And obviously we've got the 1974 Bolt decision and numerous cases following that with fishing rights. So they knew that was going to be a dagger, so they used science to create a narrative for you to say, well, they crab, yes, they've salmon fish, but they don't do it here anymore. There's already 4 refineries, lots of docks, da-da-da-da-da. Well, I personally fished there with my son, and that was one of my secret spots. And unfortunately, to prove a point, that science was wrong, or the science that they used and put into the local papers and created a narrative that there was only one crab per square mile, according to their scientific studies. So I brought the Herald out and set some pots where they said there was only one per square mile. And within 3 hours, they videoed it and documented it. And within 3 hours, we pull up the pots, and each pot came up half to 3/4 full of crab. The first one that came up, I held to the camera and said, looks like there's more than one per square mile. Somebody is wrong here. But so what is science, I find myself asking? Science is what? And at times we see things and hear things from electeds or whatever the case may be, that it's convenient. It's convenient for a position depending on what's being debated, what's being argued. And Deloria, or many indigenous philosophers and common sense leaders stress that it's just common sense. Don't solely focus on science, but we all carry common sense, and Deloria says don't let education erode your children's common sense or your common sense. Hold on to that because it's powerful. We can't let it become eroded. So I struggle with that. What is science? I know it's important, but
Just real quick. I just want to reference, we're having a conversation, and you got to be mindful of how you communicate. The English language is very tricky because you can use one word and it means many things in the context in which you reference it. For instance, for the native fights that are out there, and there's many, we're all aware, but I'm not an Indian. And if you call me an Indian, I may not say anything, but if you really try to hone it in on me, I'm going to say, I'm not an Indian. That may be legally what they define me by the United States perspective, but I'm not from another country, and I'm not, that's not, Cristobal Colon may have thought that's who we came upon, but that's not who we are. The judicial branch of the United States has incorporated that word significantly into the utilization of case law and the manipulation of words like that and how they continue to sustain a dominant force that empowers not society in general, but those who benefit in sometimes deviant ways, I guess you can say. Those who are fighting for the mighty dollar, or those who are at the expense of the resource, are people's ways of life. It's simple for us, whether it's the Cherry Point fight, whether it was the Boardman coal fight, or the derailment at Mosier, Oregon, or whatever it was. Those are all acts of extinction. Those are acts of genocide against our peoples. Those are acts of genocide in real time. In real time. Because if you're really going to get into the essence of who you are, where you come from, where you're going, what is, what isn't, and why, in a practical sense, you got to be careful. I'm not Indigenous either. Indigenous is a word that's utilized in the World Forum that means a subjugated people, as in the state governments and the UN Forum. I'm not Indigenous. I'm not Indian. And I got to be mindful, and I think this is something in the academic realm. And actually, I have a couple of tormentors. I've come to find them. Other people call them mentors. But one of my tormentors actually went to school here. His name's Stephen Newcomb. Maybe some of you know that name. But he's a strong advocate and has helped me significantly with regard to understand the etymology of words of the English language, where they come from, how they're utilized, and how they are manipulated in today's time, namely in the realm of dispute resolution when it comes to advocating for responsible decisions in the name of water, salmon, orcas, however it may be. I think that's just something that in the academic realm and in the pursuit of science or technology, that's also something to be very mindful of. I'll stop there, but something to keep informed about.
I just want to say one comment on JoDe's denying he's not an Indian. I always say it's the first corporate lie. See, Columbus owed Queen Isabella and the king. He entered an agreement. I'm going to pay you back. This journey is going to give me what I need to pay you back. And so he comes in the Western Hemisphere, and he's logging what he observed. And he said, una gente en Dios. I don't speak Spanish, but it meant one people in God. What he observed amongst the native people is that they were so kind, so giving, so generous. He had to forbid his men from breaking up glass and trading everything the native had for one little piece of it. But he realized if they were in God people, then he wouldn't be able to recover what he needed to pay back the king and queen. So he changed his record. Rather than in Dios, in God, he joined the two words, Indios, and we became Indians. He created a lie to justify the action of killing off the natives to get the gold and the silver he needed to pay back the royalty. A way to get around what the Pope would have prohibited, should have prohibited, but didn't.
Thank you so much. We are almost approaching the end. I have a decision to make, and I want to run it through our group. We could do is just to read the contribution from the participants in the room. We don't have to address them. We can just listen to them, and have them staying in the room, and then we can have without going on to them, just listen to them or some of them. I don't know whether we have time to go through all of them, and then we can wrap up and conclude. Would that be something that you consider helpful, or we can just add some comments here, and then I'm going to type them all, and we can link them to the webpage and have them available to continue the conversation. These are the two options. I don't feel like, I don't know, Jay, do you have because you pulled the mic, do you?
My home's a long, long way away from here, so I'll just speak for myself. I'm happy to, unless I've got somewhere else to go, Kurt, but happy to stick around, and I just want to stress it's what I'm taught. If you have something to say, please don't leave it here. Say it, or at least share it with us. That's pretty important.
Can I borrow your microphone?
Sure.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Oops. Do you mind? Just so we just hear them so that at least they are shared. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm Sarah. Marcia and I are going to go back and forth, just kind of reading these, just as a thought-provoking for the whole room. How do indigenous practices of ritual and ceremony imbue into scientific investigations in an ethnic or practice of care and caretaking? Example, like this of the totem pole journey.
How would you get a dominant culture to acknowledge dominance and change to earth-centered views?
How do we, as historical actors in the present, bring relationships of the past back into physical and metaphysical for the future? What tools in the current structure can we carry forward?
It's important to reflect on the extractive nature of interviews, data collection, and partnerships. Consider not only intentions, but ways in which collaborations benefit tribes first and foremost. How are you giving back to these communities in a way that is not saviorism? True collaborations come from relationship building. Who are your relations, and how do you build them?
On the issue of cultural translation in colonial power dynamics, settler-indigenous relations, how do you see these spaces of translation and evocation as inhibitive or conducive to decolonial liberation, both in theory and in praxis? Can differences in language eventually be overcome through the evolution of ontology and epistemology, or merely mediated. Thank you for your time and perspective.
How can we begin to heal after many generations of one with pain and suffering?
Why science? Can we say ceremony is research?
Is it possible for Western perspectives to be non-coercive when they are heir to coercive practices?
Can ceremony be probabilistic?
What can you teach white culture about the way tribes make decisions?
And do you want to read your own?
No, go ahead.
Indigenous people have passed down hundreds of generations of empirical observations, the pillar of the scientific method. Why do Western scientists not value that science? Is it a fetish for the written record? Is it simply a belief in their own superiority? That's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for hearing that. And we have a couple of more minutes if any one of the panelists, it's not about answering, but it's about hearing the voices. And there is a possibility to have a brief moment because we have the room until 4. We can stay a little longer, but we cannot go much over it. Also because of all the people who are helping us here, and I don't want to stretch their time too much. But I think we have 5 to 7 minutes to have a quick round of if anyone wants to address any of the things that have been mentioned in the room. Thank you.
I'm glad we have a philosopher here. He has all the answers. but I forgot what my answer was going to be. That's really complicated to try to answer all those questions because, they're so broad. But I always say it's because you're limited in the measurement of reality. And I was saying earlier, it's you see the world, you taste the world, you touch the world, you smell the world, you hear the world. And this is too hard, or it's too soft, it's too loud, or it's too quiet, it's too bright, or it's too dark, it's too bitter, or it's too sweet. Yeah. How do we overcome that limitation? If you have a real narrow way of measuring reality, then you're going to miss the fact that the tree is singing, the grass is singing. Studies have shown that things growing in the earth have their own song. Dr. Emoto, when he did his work on the power of water, showed a picture of the earth to water and it made crystals of love. Water loves the earth. But he found out that water wants to be appreciated more than it wants to be loved. And so that's not normal science. And maybe we weren't seeking that answer. Now they say they can take a swab inside your mouth and then stimulate you, and what they swabbed and left on that sample, if you stimulate the person, the cells will respond, even if you're 50 miles away or 500 miles away or 5,000, they're going to respond and form the same patterns. So it's how we do the studies and the answers we're looking for. I guess that's why we're saying we're trying to identify what is the question. We all have answers, whether or not they help us feel full and complete is the real question. But Dr. Russo did a lot of studies using a methodology developed by Clyde Colloquium. Yeah, and on values orientation theory, and he had a national board and an international board. One running off to Africa, South Africa, to help them on the black-white problem there, teach them the methodology to use it for resolving the interracial strife. But I would ask him, how do we turn that into answers for the court when we're in battles with corporations that are stripping the earth of forest, damming the rivers, destroying the world around us? How do we use those answers in a way that the science is proving that we were right all along. You just didn't understand us when we first talked to you about it. And so those questions are all important, but I would like us to answer JoDe's first 6 questions first before we get to those answers.
I too do not have the answers. You know, I think when it comes to the practical side of things, you know, what kind of relations do we have? Today, you're all my relation. You know, we're all having a discussion together. We're all thinking together. We're all spending time. I think this totem journey is a exercise of forming relationships and trying to find like-minded, more importantly, like-hearted, like-spirited individuals who, whether or not, you know, someone like me, I'm sitting there in my own little way answering these 6 questions for everybody I interact with, you know. And so I'm sitting there and I'm trying to come to the determination as to whether or not they understand or have come to a realization for themselves that perhaps they are of creation. Because if you can do that, then it kind of changes things, but you still got to get back into the practical world. You can't just let it all fade away. And if you come to the determination that the spirit is real, it can get, that's when you start going down the rabbit hole a little bit with regard to, you know, how you justify your thoughts and where those thoughts take you and how they manifest into what action, you know. And so being mindful of how your individual awareness interacts with that of the collective awareness and what you are intending to do with that individual awareness is something that I think is critical. So getting into the specifics of those questions is one thing, but I do believe that I'm going to, you know, echo Jewell. You got to have a better understanding of the 6 questions, not so much to say your answers are more right than my answers or I'm more right than you or this. No, it's about a foundation by which you can find an inner relationship that you relate in principle to the answers that you have come forth and that you respect the answers that somebody else has. And that, I think, is the formation for respectful and responsible communication. And I think it's only then, I agree, it's only then that you can get into a determination, and whether you get into the specifics of detailed scientific analysis or whether you get into the simplicity of life, it's all the same. And I'll end with this. All right, this is my disclaimer, okay? Because in the world of what is and what isn't and why, you know, I think about that, and I'll tell my kids this. The truth of life is this. Life is a stage. That's the truth of life, all right? It is a stage in all shapes and forms, if you can come to that realization. The key to life is to react with integrity, regardless of what is presented before your individual stage. And if you can do that, you'll be fine. That's, you know, so to me, that would be the answer to all those questions. You know, if somebody really got down with me and we can have a long discussion, and if I can relate to you in a practical way about what you're talking about, or if you lose me because you're using words I don't understand or whatever it may be, we're going to get down to the principles of the thought that is manifesting from both of our minds and hearts and spirits at that time, and we'll get back to the simplicity of life somewhere in that discussion. And I think those principles is where we're going to find some interrelationship. And I think if you can find like-minded hearts, spirits, you know, like that, then we start formalizing the kind of communication that's going to have hopefully manifestation of more responsible decisions into the future. That's what you're trying to do here. Put your minds and hearts together. Good minds, good hearts, good spirits come together, and it's not like you can sit there and think about the answers are necessary, because we're facing a supernatural problem. The kind of detriment and the kind of things that we face as a collective people, society, it is a supernatural problem. The human mind nor heart, all right, cannot come up with the solutions. As smart as you think you may be or are, all right, you don't have the kind of answers that we need collectively. And I'm going to tell you that prayer is an absolute necessity. And so, okay, I'll stop there.
I just want to say those are great questions, and I'd love to, you know, I wish we had more time to have a discussion with each and every one. I think I opened up with language. You multiple times and others say they're not indigenous, but the truth is you are native from somewhere. Where is that? And early on in my short conversation with you, I had asked the question, what happened? When was the relationship severed? When was the oneness and the divorce from what we now call nature? When did that take place and where? And I don't know if you necessarily have to dig too deep, but I think those questions are important to lead us to this marriage we're in together in this country. It's tough for many reasons, because the way we are today is still today, and when Columbus said what Jewell mentioned in his journals, we're still that way. To be a high-class person within our tribes, within our nations, is not to hoard and accumulate lots and sit up on top of the mountain and pound your chest and look down on people. It's to give everything away. It's called potlatch. It's called different things. And that's what a high CM is. It's not, I'm better than you. We all have a purpose. We all have a role. We still carry on those practices today within our nations and at Lummi. We don't abandon our ancestors. We don't abandon their philosophies. We don't abandon what got us to where we are today. And what includes a lot of that today is the willingness to survive, to not frown upon and dwell on life's scars and seek pity, but how do we come together as one, each and every one of us, to move forward through this marriage? But we feed ourselves. And there are some cities and some states that can't provide their own water. And that's not your fault here in Oregon. It's not Washington's fault. It's not others' fault. But these are the realities I don't think we think deep enough about. But there's cities that can't provide for themselves. And when you look into our nations and in our tribes and the way we live and our water sources and food sources, they're everything. 52 million tons to China, that may sound good from an educational perspective or a trade perspective, but for us it makes absolutely zero sense. To do what you're going to do, desecrate what you're going to desecrate, pollute what you're going to pollute, harm and give cancer to the locals and all of that, to send to a different country. Still today, that does not make sense. So we're caught in these two different worlds, and we try to frame this into the English language from being brought up by individuals who are raised by pre-contact individuals, and it's an extreme challenge today. But we're trying, and I thank you for the questions, because they're all great. But we each have to ask ourselves questions, and I think one that's important is, you are native from somewhere. What happened? Why flee? This wasn't a new world with nothing. This was a world since the beginning of time where you call home now, and we had everything. Everything. So I think those are some important questions. What happened? Why did we flee our ancestors? We couldn't even begin to fathom fleeing home, family, my ancestors, my relatives under the water, our relationship with the salmon and the rivers and the orca. We're all connected. There's no way. But I think that's an important question for us to communicate with one another. We have to understand, but I believe you're native from somewhere.
And I'll just say thank you for the opportunity to be part of this conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for coming here. For the gifts you brought and for coming, everyone. We will continue the conversation with other events, and you're so generous with your time. So hope to see you around. Take the opportunity to get as much as you can from this incredible encounter. Thank you.
And please, if you have time, put your hands on the totem pole outside. It's going on a long journey, and whatever faith you belong to, whatever prayers or just good thoughts. It's for important causes, and if you can lay your hands on it or be around it and say a prayer or good thoughts around it, we appreciate that. Haishka.
Thank you.